Willie Smith, Streetwear, and the Forgotten Elegance of America. That's what I'm titling this little talk. So, Philadelphia is a city of many firsts and maybe revolutionary ideas from revolutionary people and revolutionary fashion. So in 1976, during the bicentennial of America, a young designer by the name of Willie Smith, he launched what would be considered the modern streetwear era of culture. And he would be called the father of streetwear. Yeah. And I don't know what do you think about streetwear? When I think of streetwear, I think of how casual it has gotten, streetwear. And they say the streets are dead in America, if you know what that means. And I think of that in culture where we are and this retrospective and reckoning of culture. When I grew up in Philadelphia, there were many designers. We had design houses in our neighborhoods. My mother grew up the same way. There were local seamstresses and tailors that if you needed anything for a special occasion, even your wedding, your prom, there was someone that could make it for you. And I remember a designer in Germantown by the name of Joseph Palmieri, and he had jeans, okay, denims that were bespoke, and they were expensive. But these were amazing designs, and people that wore them, he became known in Philadelphia. Palmieri jeans, okay? And that is something that I would love to see come back. Design houses where we bring back the power of American creativity and design. Why do we have to have things made overseas in factories where people are being abused, even? Okay, I'm getting off into some other. Okay, let's go back to Willie Smith, okay? So he changed global fashion, and this was the birth of what we see as casual. And he believed that the everyday person should be able to access fashion and not just the design houses of Europe and New York, not just the runways, in other words. So he brought couture to the streets. And so he launched his line called Willie Wear. And he mixed art, culture, everyday life into fashion. And he collaborated with filmmakers, dancers, artists, and it just became trendy. I remember having a few pieces of Willie Wear, but I got it very discounted. My mother knew where to go. Artie's, if you're from Philadelphia, we would go to Artie's and places like that. And I got me a few pieces of Willie Wear back then. And his designs even reached American royalty. Yes. In 1986, Willie Smith designed the groom and groomsmen suits for Caroline Kennedy's wedding. Yeah. Yeah. So can you imagine a streetwear pioneer now entering the Kennedy Circle? Philadelphia style meeting American legacy. But something interesting happened. And streetwear did democratize fashion and it gave culture a voice. And it told young people everywhere that style didn't have to come from elite institutions. It could come from the sidewalk, from the block. and from the rhythm of everyday life. It was powerful, and when we step back and look at the longer story of American clothing, something else happens. That's where the forgotten elegance of America. You think about the 1700s and the 1800s, what they consider antebellum America. You look at photographs and you see something striking. Ordinary people dressed in remarkable elegance. That was normalized. They had tailored coats. You notice how I wanted to sit up straight. Tailored coats and structured dresses, natural fabrics, wools and linens and cottons and silks. Garments were designed almost like architecture. Clothing that shaped the body, lifted the posture, and created a sense of dignity. Even laborers often wore garments that today might be considered formal. Elegance back then was not rare, it was normal. Clothing as architecture. Older garments were built with intention. Seams, tailoring, and structure worked together like the framework of a building. When you wore them, you stood differently. You stood with your shoulders opened and your spine straightened. Your movements showed and became more deliberate. You slowed down. It was a slower way of living. And clothing does shape behavior, I believe. What do you think about that? I know I act different when I'm all dressed up. I act a little more elevated, right? And again, with the posture, that's a part of your wellness, your health. And it even shaped how people carried themselves in public life. So it made you act better. Wow. In many ways, garments were like portable architecture for the body and the fabric of the body. And then there's the fabric itself. For most of human history, clothing was made from natural fibers. We talk about that. We talk about the frequency of fibers. It's in the Bible, right? We know if you sleep on cotton and linen, you're going to sleep better. You're probably going to have beautiful dreams as well. Wools and silk. These materials breathe and they regulate temperature. They move with the body and allow the skin to function naturally. Our biggest organ, our skin. So today, much of modern fashion relies heavily on synthetics. When you think about all of that, what do they call them? The evil twins, polyester. These are, what are they? Byproducts of the petroleum industry? I could get on a whole tangent about that. So heavily relying on these synthetics, plastic-based fabrics that trap heat and moisture. Need I say more? You don't want to sit next to somebody on the train with a whole lot of polyester. Okay, back to what I was saying. Natural fibers create a very different relationship between the body and the garment. They feel grounded, organic, almost alive. So there was a cultural shift from the 1800s and the 1970s and then where we are now. Everybody's wearing Crocs. Why? So the story of streetwear is fascinating in itself because in some ways it was rebellious. And we as humans, we're always rebelling, finding a way to rebel. We need to stop. A rebellion against fashion being controlled by maybe elite institutions, But again, when I talk about how I grew up in Philadelphia, fashion was not being controlled by elite institutions back in the 1970s. It was being controlled by the neighborhood, the block. Jenny from the block. The block parties, right? That's who controlled fashion. And we gave our control away. So Willie Smith, he helped to open the door for everyday people to participate in style. Although I would debate that. We always participated in style. But I guess this is post the takeover of fashion by elite institutions. So they considered what he did revolutionary. And now, decades later, we're asking a new question. Was streetwear a destination or was it a bridge? And then the Jubilee question comes in. This is where my wheelhouse. What if the next wave of fashion comes from both worlds? The accessibility of streetwear with the elegance and the craftsmanship of earlier eras, the antebellum American era. Clothing that feels comfortable, but also elevates the body. Garments that are made from natural fibers and designed with intention. Clothing that reminds us that style isn't just decoration, it's culture, it's identity. And sometimes it's a reflection of how a civilization sees itself. So Willie Smith changed the culture by bringing fashion down to earth. But perhaps the next chapter of fashion asks us to rise again, not into elitism, but into elevation. Because when garments rise, posture rises, presence rises, and sometimes a whole culture rises with it. What do you think? Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon.